Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are very excited to share different stories about love and betrayal from around the world with you. So now let's begin today's story journey. David stared out at the gloomy Montreal sky, realizing the city's weather today matched his mood perfectly. 6 years ago, he and Sylvia met at a coffee shop in Montreal, and the wheels of fate began to turn. Back then, he was a technician at an electrical engineering company, while she was an administrative assistant at a hospital. Now, he had become a senior electrical technician at the company, responsible for installing and maintaining electrical systems for large commercial projects. As for Sylvia, she had become a medical equipment sales representative, a job that required frequent travel. The sound of keys came from the porch, and David turned around. Sylvia pushed open the door, her suitcase rolling behind her. She looked tired but energetic, with the scent of expensive perfume around her. "You're back," David said. "How was the trip?" Sylvia barely glanced at him, focusing on her phone screen, exhausted. "Is there anything to eat in the kitchen?" "I'm hungry." David pointed toward the kitchen. "I made pasta, the way you like it. It's still warm." She nodded absent-mindedly, pushed her suitcase aside, and walked toward the kitchen. David followed her, watching as she served herself a plate of pasta, then walked toward the living room. "By the way," she said as she walked, "I have an early meeting tomorrow morning. Can you take Emma to school?" David nodded. Their 6-year-old daughter Emma was sleeping upstairs. "Of course, no problem." "Oh," and Sylvia added, "I have dinner with some important clients tomorrow evening. Might be back late." "Don't wait up." David watched her sit on the sofa, eating the food he had prepared while scrolling through her phone. Her attention was no longer on him. Or perhaps, it could be said, she almost treated home as a convenient stopover, a place where someone provided food and service. And he seemed to have become the waiter at this hotel. When did things start to change? David lay in bed thinking about this question. Sylvia's figure appeared at the bathroom door. She had finished her shower and was wearing pajamas, but still sending emails. The initial change happened about a year ago, when Sylvia switched from being a hospital administrative assistant to a medical equipment sales representative. The new job brought a higher salary, but also required frequent travel. At first, David was happy for her career development. But soon, he noticed she began buying more expensive clothes, jewelry, and her manner of speaking and behavior became increasingly superior. "How was your work today?" David asked, trying to establish some connection. "The usual," Sylvia briefly replied. "Some meetings, some presentations. By the way, I might need to buy another formal outfit. I'm going to Vancouver next week for an important meeting." "Okay," David said. "We might need to adjust our budget because Emma's school is organizing a field trip next month, which requires some expenses." Sylvia frowned. "Well, you handle that. I'm making more money now. You can take care of these family matters." Her tone carried obvious impatience. David held back his discomfort and nodded. He didn't want to cause an argument while Emma was sleeping. Sylvia slid under the covers, turning her back to him. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness, fingers continuing to tap on the screen. A few minutes later, she seemed to receive a message that made her happy, letting out a slight laugh. When David asked what she was laughing at, she vaguely said it was work-related, then quickly turned off her phone, pretending to go to sleep. The next day, after dropping Emma off at school, David went straight to his work site. He was in charge of installing electrical systems in a newly constructed office building. Although the work was busy and sometimes tiring, he never neglected his family because of it. He always made time to attend Emma's school activities, take her to the park on weekends, and cook dinner for the family in the evening. "Hey, David, you don't look too happy today." His colleague Mike came over and said, "Is everything okay?" David forced a smile. "A little issue at home, nothing major." Mike patted his shoulder. "I know that feeling. Linda and I had a big argument last month too, but we found time to talk it out, and now things are much better." David nodded, but he knew his problem wasn't something that could be solved with just one conversation. The gulf between him and Sylvia was growing daily, and he wasn't even sure if she cared about that. Back at home, David found Sylvia wasn't there again. There was a note on the dining table. "Last-minute meeting. Handle dinner yourself. Don't wait up. S." He sighed, opened the refrigerator, and began preparing dinner. Emma ran in from the living room. "Dad, is Mom not home again?" David forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. Mom's very busy with work." How about we watch a movie together tonight? Emma nodded, but David could see her disappointment. As days passed, David noticed more and more abnormalities. Sylvia's work schedule became increasingly irregular, sometimes even claiming to be on business trips on weekends. She was always wearing new clothes, using new cosmetics, and almost completely neglecting household chores. She often left dirty clothes lying around, expecting David to pick them up, used dishes piled up in the sink. Even preparations for Emma's birthday fell entirely on David. One night, when Sylvia came home late again, David smelled an unfamiliar cologne on her. It wasn't his, nor did it seem like any perfume she had used before. "How was the meeting tonight?" David asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Went well," Sylvia answered, taking off her high heels. "We landed a big client." "Really? Which company?" Sylvia paused, as if thinking. "A medical center. You wouldn't know it." Too much professional jargon. She quickly changed the subject. "Is Emma asleep?" "Yes. She waited for you until 9, but you didn't come back." Sylvia frowned slightly. "I'm very busy with work, David. I can't always be back on time. We need to earn more, don't we?" David wanted to point out that his income was sufficient to cover family expenses, and they weren't short of money. But he knew this would only lead to more arguments. Instead, he decided to directly ask the question that had been bothering him. "Who were you with tonight?" Sylvia's expression instantly became guarded. "What do you mean?" "I was with clients and colleagues, of course." "Then why do you smell like men's cologne?" Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly regained composure. "Probably from a waiter or some client. I was discussing business all night, David. I can't control who stands next to me." She quickly walked to the bathroom, ending the conversation. David stood there, the feeling of unease growing stronger. The next day, David checked their shared account on the computer. Over the past few months, several hotel accommodation expenses caught his attention. These expenses appeared on days when Sylvia claimed to be on business trips, but the locations were in Montreal itself. Why would she need to book hotels in the city where she lived? He also noticed expenditures at high-end restaurants, amounts clearly showing meals for 2 people. But Sylvia had never mentioned taking anyone other than him to these restaurants. David's palms began to sweat. He wanted to believe everything had a reasonable explanation, but the evidence seemed increasingly obvious. He needed more information, but he didn't want to obtain it by invading Sylvia's privacy. That wasn't his way of doing things. That night, David tried to have a sincere conversation with Sylvia. "Can we talk?" he asked as Sylvia was about to go out. She was wearing a new dress he had never seen before, with elaborate makeup. "Not now, David. I'm already running late." She hurriedly grabbed her wallet and car keys. "Is it work-related?" "Yes, an important client." "On Saturday night." She stopped, giving him a cold look. "The medical field doesn't have weekends. You should know that." "We haven't spent time together for a long time, Sylvia. Emma misses you too." Sylvia sighed. "Look, I know work has been busy lately, but it's for our future. Can't you support me a little?" "I've always supported you," David said calmly. "But I feel we're growing more distant." "It's just temporary," she said, but her eyes didn't meet his. "Once I stabilize, everything will be fine. I really have to go now." Before David could respond, she rushed out the door. A few days later, David received an unexpected call. It was from the hospital's administrative department, wanting to confirm if Sylvia's recent sick leave application was genuine. David felt confused because Sylvia hadn't mentioned being sick. He tactfully told the caller that Sylvia no longer worked at the hospital, but was now a medical equipment sales representative. "Oh, is that so?" The person on the phone sounded surprised. "Our records show she still works in the administrative department, just taking a lot of sick leave recently." David felt dizzy. He politely ended the call, then immediately called Sylvia. The phone went straight to voicemail. That evening, when Sylvia returned home, David immediately raised the issue. "The hospital called today," he said. "They said you're still working there and have taken a lot of sick leave." Sylvia's face turned pale instantly, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, that must be an administrative error. The paperwork for my resignation might not have been fully processed." "What about your new job?" "Medical equipment sales representative." "Of course it's real," she quickly answered. "I just didn't tell you. I'm actually in a transition period, working 2 jobs part-time, seeing which suits me better." David looked into her eyes. "Then why not just tell me?" "I didn't want to worry you," she said. And I wanted to wait until I was sure before discussing it. David wanted to ask more, but Sylvia skillfully changed the subject, starting to talk about a notice from Emma's school that needed signing. All evening, she avoided falling back into this topic. In the following weeks, David began to pay more attention to Sylvia's actions. He noticed she frequently mentioned someone named James, supposedly a mentor at work. Whenever she mentioned this name, her eyes would sparkle with a different light. One day, when Sylvia claimed to be attending a weekend conference, David decided to do some investigation. He didn't track her. That wasn't his style, but instead called several medical equipment companies she had mentioned, asking if they had an employee named Sylvia. All companies gave negative answers. David's heart sank. Now he could almost be certain that Sylvia had been deceiving him. She probably didn't have a new job at all, but was using the pretense of work to date someone else. This explained why the hospital still thought she worked there, why she always had new clothes and jewelry, why she smelled of unfamiliar men's cologne. But he still needed concrete evidence, partly to fully convince himself, and partly to protect his and Emma's interests if necessary. The opportunity soon came. Sylvia's computer was at home while she went out shopping. David never looked through her personal items, but at this point, he felt it concerned the future of their family. He opened the computer and found it had no password. Sylvia probably thought the home was safe and didn't need one. He opened Sylvia's email application, which she hadn't logged out of, and saw numerous conversations with James. The contents confirmed his worst suspicions. Sylvia and this James had been in a relationship for at least 6 months. The emails were filled with intimate language and date plans, even some photos that made David feel sick. More shockingly, from the email content, James was a hospital neurosurgeon, married with 2 children. Their dates usually took place in high-end hotels or cities where James was traveling. Sylvia would claim to have work arrangements, when in fact she was meeting him for rendezvous. David put down the phone, feeling an unprecedented anger and betrayal. He had always tried to be a good husband and father, while Sylvia had so disregarded their marriage. He wasn't just betrayed, but treated as a free nanny and housekeeper, providing her with a convenient base from which she could pursue an exciting life outside. That night, after Emma was asleep, David attempted to have a serious conversation with Sylvia. "We need to talk," he said, his voice deeper than usual, "about James." Sylvia's face immediately turned pale. "James? What James? Stop pretending, Sylvia. I know about you too." She was first shocked, then quickly turned defensive. "You looked at my computer? How dare you invade my privacy? After you've been violating our marriage for months, you're talking about privacy?" David countered. "You've been deceiving me, deceiving Emma. You don't even have a new job, do you?" Sylvia's attitude suddenly softened, tears in her eyes. "David, I didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened. James understands me, supports my ambitions. And I don't understand you, don't support you." David shook his head in disbelief. "I've been trying to maintain this home, take care of Emma, support your choices. And you? You treat home like a hotel, and me like a servant. You don't understand," Sylvia defended. "I need more. An exciting life, someone who understands my inner world." "Have you thought about Emma?" David asked. "How will your behavior affect her?" Sylvia avoided his eyes. "I love Emma, but I also need to live for myself. Through deception and betrayal? I don't want to discuss this anymore." Sylvia suddenly stood up. "You wouldn't understand." She walked out of the room, leaving David alone to think about what to do next. It was then he realized their marriage might be beyond saving. But before making any decisions, he needed to prepare for himself and Emma. In the following weeks, David began planning secretly. He consulted a divorce lawyer, learned about his rights and potential issues. He started collecting evidence of Sylvia's affair, suspicious expenditures on bank statements, hotel booking confirmation emails, records of her emails with James. He also documented evidence of how Sylvia neglected family responsibilities. Emma's school activity records showing David attended almost all events while Sylvia was absent. Family bills showing almost all expenses were borne by David. Even Emma's diary recording feelings of loss because mom was often not home. At the same time, David began preparing for possible separation. He found an apartment not far from Emma's school, started slowly transferring some personal items, and set up a separate bank account. During this time, Sylvia didn't seem to notice any changes. Her affair became more reckless, sometimes not even bothering to make excuses for coming home late or not at all. Her attitude toward home was more like a temporary visitor, not part of this family. The anger in David's heart gradually transformed into calm determination. He wouldn't suffer silently like a victim, but he also wouldn't lower his moral standards. His revenge would be carefully planned, not illegal, but powerful enough to make both Sylvia and James feel the cost of betrayal. He had the materials ready for the lawyer, and he had also written a long letter, detailing how Sylvia had betrayed their marriage, neglected her responsibilities to Emma, and his true feelings about this relationship. He also prepared a detailed list of household chores and expenses, clearly showing how much responsibility he had shouldered in this home. Finally, he wrote a letter to James's wife, attaching evidence of James and Sylvia's relationship. He knew this might destroy another family, but he believed that wife had the right to know the truth, just as he did. With everything prepared, David only needed to wait for the right moment. That moment came soon. Sylvia announced she would attend a 3-day sales conference. In reality, David knew she planned to spend a weekend with James at a luxury resort. "Can you take care of Emma?" she asked, her tone suggesting this wasn't a question, but a matter-of-course arrangement. "Of course, I always do, don't I?" David calmly replied. Sylvia hardly noticed the coldness in his tone, busy packing her luggage. "Thanks, I'll be back Sunday night." "Have fun," David said, with James. Sylvia's hand stopped in midair, then quickly resumed motion, pretending not to hear. She hurriedly finished packing, kissed Emma's forehead as she watched TV, then left home. David turned to Emma. "Hey, sweetie, how about we do something special this weekend?" Emma's eyes lit up. "Really? What?" "Tomorrow we'll go to the amusement park. Then on Sunday, we might move to a new place to stay for a while." "Are we moving? Is Mom coming too?" David took a deep breath. "No, sweetie, Mom won't be coming with us. We need some time apart. But you'll see Mom often, I promise." Emma looked somewhat confused, but she trusted her father. "Okay, Dad. Will I have my own room in our new home?" "Of course," David smiled. "And you can help me pick out new furniture." Sunday night, when Sylvia returned home, she found the house unusually quiet. "David? Emma?" she called, but there was no response. She walked into the living room and saw an envelope on the coffee table with her name on it. She opened the envelope and found several papers inside. The first was a handwritten letter from David, detailing how he discovered her betrayal, how she treated home like a hotel and him like a servant, and the harm this caused him and Emma. The language in the letter was calm but sharp, each word cutting into her heart like a knife. The second was a detailed breakdown of household and parenting responsibilities, clearly showing David had shouldered almost all family responsibilities in the past few years. The third was a copy of bank and credit card statements, marking all her expenditures used for dates with James. The last was a copy of a divorce petition, already submitted to the court. Sylvia's hands began to shake. She picked up her phone to call David, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried to email James, but found he wasn't responding either. Just then, her phone rang. It was the hospital's number. "Sylvia," the voice on the other end was her supervisor. "We need you to come to the HR department tomorrow morning. There are some things we need to discuss." "What things?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We've received some complaints about inappropriate relationships between you and hospital staff. We'll discuss the details tomorrow." After the call ended, Sylvia collapsed onto the sofa. She realized David not only knew all her secrets, but had taken action. Her job, marriage, even possibly custody of Emma, everything was in jeopardy. She tried to contact James again, this time finally getting through. "We can't contact each other anymore." James's voice sounded tired and fearful. "My wife received all the evidence. I'm facing divorce and disciplinary action from the hospital." "It's David," Sylvia whispered. "He knows everything." "Whoever it is," James said. "We did wrong, Sylvia. And now we have to pay the price." After the call ended, Sylvia picked up the letter again, this time reading it carefully. The final part of the letter completely broke her down. "I've already moved out with Emma. My lawyer will contact you to discuss custody arrangements. Given your affair and long-term neglect of responsibilities toward Emma, I will apply for primary custody. Considering the evidence I've collected, I believe the court will agree with my request. You treated our home like a hotel and me like a servant. Now the hotel is closed. and the servant has quit. Welcome back to the real world, Sylvia. Sylvia began to sob, finally realizing what she had lost. She picked up her phone, sending message after message to David, begging for a chance to explain, a chance to make amends. But she knew some mistakes couldn't be undone. Some prices had to be paid. David sat in the living room of the new apartment, watching Emma arrange her toys and books in her new room. It had been a week since the move, and Sylvia's emails and calls still kept coming. Initially angry and accusatory, they later became apologies and pleas, and recently, complete breakdown and begging for forgiveness. He hadn't replied to any of them, only communicating through lawyers when necessary. He needed this time to stabilize Emma's emotions, while also giving himself some space to deal with the pain brought by this failed marriage. The lawyer told him Sylvia had received a summons from the court, with the preliminary hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. Based on the evidence they had collected, David was likely to get primary custody of Emma, with Sylvia receiving limited visitation rights. Meanwhile, the hospital was investigating Sylvia and James's inappropriate relationship. James faced serious disciplinary action for violating hospital ethics, and Sylvia's job was also in jeopardy. David didn't feel happy or satisfied about this. He just wanted justice, wanted Sylvia and James to understand the consequences of their actions. He wanted to protect Emma from further harm, to provide her with a stable home. One evening, after Emma was asleep, the doorbell rang. David looked through the peephole and saw Sylvia standing outside, looking haggard. He hesitated, then opened the door. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly. "All communication should go through the lawyers." "David, please." Sylvia's eyes were red and swollen. "Give me 5 minutes. I need to explain." "Explain what?" David leaned against the doorframe. "I've already seen everything I need to know. I know I made a terrible mistake." Her voice trembled. "But I love you and Emma. I can change." David shook his head. "Love isn't like that, Sylvia. Love is respect, loyalty, sharing responsibilities. You forgot all that long ago." "I'll accept all consequences," she said. "I've been suspended from the hospital. James's wife has filed for divorce, and he might lose his license. I know I deserve this, but please don't take Emma away from me." "I'm not taking Emma away from you," David corrected. "You chose to leave her. When you repeatedly chose to be with James instead of with her, that was your choice." Sylvia lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I can change. Give me a chance." "Everyone deserves a second chance," David said, "but not in the same relationship. Our marriage is over, Sylvia. You can earn your second chance by being a better mother, but no longer as my wife." He gently closed the door, leaving Sylvia standing outside. When he returned to the living room, he saw Emma standing at her bedroom door, her eyes wide. "Was that Mom?" she asked quietly. David nodded, walking over to crouch down to her eye level. "Yes, sweetie. Mom came to see if we're safe." "We are safe, right?" "Yes, we're safe. Come on. It's time to go back to bed. We're going to see that new park tomorrow, remember?" Emma nodded, letting David carry her back to bed. As he tucked her in, she asked, "When will Mom come to see me?" David gently stroked her hair. "Soon, sweetie. We're arranging that. But you should know, no matter what happens, Dad and Mom both love you." Emma closed her eyes and soon fell asleep. David sat by the bed, looking at her peaceful face, his heart filled with determination to protect her. 2 days later, David agreed to Sylvia's request for a brief meeting with Emma, with him present. They chose a public park, giving Emma a familiar environment while keeping the meeting public. When Sylvia arrived, Emma was swinging on a swing. Seeing her mother, she jumped off the swing and ran over. "Mom!" Sylvia crouched down and hugged Emma tightly. "Oh, sweetie, Mom missed you so much." David stood aside, giving them some private time. He noticed Sylvia looked much more haggard, with obvious dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes were no longer so elegant. Sylvia played on the swings and slides with Emma for a while. Then the three sat on a bench eating sandwiches David had brought. The atmosphere was awkward but peaceful. "How's your new home?" Sylvia asked Emma. "Good," Emma answered. "I have my own room, and the walls are purple, just like I like." "Sounds great," Sylvia smiled, but David could see the pain in her eyes. "Are you doing well in school?" Emma nodded, then suddenly asked, "Why aren't you living with us, Mom?" Sylvia looked at David, seemingly seeking help. David nodded slightly, indicating she could answer honestly, but in a way appropriate for a child to understand. Mom made some mistakes, sweetie, Sylvia said softly. I didn't take care of our home and Dad as I should have. So now we need some time apart for Mom to learn to do better. Emma frowned her little brow. But you'll still come to see me, right? Of course, as often as Dad allows. I'll come to see you as much as I can. At the end of the meeting, Sylvia hugged Emma again, then turned to David. Thank you for letting me see her. David nodded. Emma needs her mother. Whatever happened between us, that won't change. As they left the park, David looked back. Sylvia was still sitting on the bench, her face in her hands. Despite the anger and pain still in his heart, he also felt a twinge of compassion. On the day of the hearing, David and Sylvia met in the court hallway. She looked prepared, but there was still fear in her eyes. I want you to know, she said quietly, I won't fight for custody. I know Emma is better off with you. I just want reasonable visitation rights. David was somewhat surprised. That's a wise decision. The best choice for Emma. I finally understand, she smiled bitterly. It's not about what I want, but what Emma needs. The hearing went more smoothly than expected. The judge approved their agreement. David got primary custody. Sylvia got visitation rights every 2 weeks, gradually increasing to alternate weekends, provided she could prove her life was stable and responsible. Leaving the court, Sylvia stopped David. James's wife contacted me. David paused. Oh, she wants to meet, to hear my story in person. I agreed. Sylvia took a deep breath. I owe her the truth, no matter how painful. That's brave, David admitted. I hope it gives her some answers. I don't know what will happen next, Sylvia said. But I want you to know, I'm truly sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for hurting you and Emma. David looked at her, seeing sincere remorse for the first time. I believe you're sincere. But some hurts can't be easily healed. I know. I just hope one day, when Emma is old enough to understand all this, you'll help her not to hate me. I will never let Emma hate you, Sylvia. You're still her mother. They parted in silence, each heading toward different futures. 6 months later, David's life gradually found a new rhythm. He and Emma settled into the new apartment. He received a promotion at work, and Emma adapted to the new living arrangements. Sylvia complied with all visitation regulations, even starting to attend Emma's school activities. One day, when David picked Emma up from school, she told him Mom had a new job, doing administrative work at a community clinic. She said she's not doing sales anymore, Emma said, because it kept her too far from home. David nodded. That sounds like a good change. Back home, he received an email from Sylvia. She usually only contacted him about visitation arrangements, so this email caught his attention. The content was brief but sincere. She wrote that she had started counseling, trying to understand what led her to make those choices. She mentioned she had several difficult but necessary conversations with James's wife, and both were working to recover from the betrayal. She also wrote that she no longer had any contact with James, and they both realized their relationship was built on the wrong foundation. Finally, she wrote, I don't expect your forgiveness, David. I just want you to know that your actions, though painful for me at the time, actually gave me a chance to re-examine my life. I used to think I needed more excitement, more recognition, but I now understand that true satisfaction comes from respecting others and oneself, keeping promises, and taking responsibility for one's actions. Thank you for still allowing me to be part of Emma's life. I promise to strive to be the mother she deserves. David closed the email, feeling a calmness he hadn't experienced in months. He might never be able to forgive Sylvia for what she did to him, but he was glad to see her making positive changes, mainly for Emma's sake. He walked to the balcony, looking at the Montreal skyline. The clouds in the sky were clearing, revealing a clear blue sky. He thought of the letter that changed everything, the letter he wrote to Sylvia, detailing her betrayal and his decision. That letter wasn't about revenge, but about truth and justice. It also gave him the strength to do what he needed to do, protect his dignity, protect Emma's future, while also forcing Sylvia to face her actions and choices. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't angry words or violent actions, but simple truth. Truth may hurt, but it also has the power to heal. For David, despite experiencing betrayal and pain, he didn't let these experiences turn him into an angry or resentful person. Instead, he chose to be strong, chose to create an environment full of love and honesty for Emma. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew, whatever happened, he could face it. When Emma called him to help with homework, David left the balcony, returning to the warm space they now called home. This home might be smaller than their previous house, but it was filled with sincerity and respect, qualities that had gradually disappeared in his past marriage. In Emma's smile, in the new daily routine they created together, in every moment of honesty and respect, David found true happiness. This wasn't the life he had once expected, but it was real. It was his own choice, not a role imposed on him by others. In this new beginning, he was no longer anyone's servant, but the master of his own life. This was the true gift that letter gave him, not the satisfaction of revenge, but the opportunity to regain freedom and dignity. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't making the other person suffer, but making yourself happy. And this, David had achieved. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more great content. Looking forward to seeing you in our next story.